Did I miss the memo? Wow. We had some folks last week too. This must be the committee to be at, or you got nothing better to do on a Monday afternoon. Thank you all for being here. There's a lot that will be discussed and probably cussed today, and we'll talk about that as the day unfolds. But this is an issue that has been important, I think, to this committee and to this chairman anyway, all these different things. And to give the opportunity to show the interest of both sides of this means that we can have, I believe, a robust debate on a number of subjects, and one of those is today. Before we get going on the hearing, is there anyone here for any bill introductions? Seeing none, we will do that again tomorrow. It is 3:36, so we will start the hearing on House Bill 2541, dealing with the establishing a state conservation fund. And first to explain this bill, we'll call on David Weiss. Normally Kyle would, but David, I believe you're the author of this. You're the language expert on some of these things, and so welcome to committee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a while since I've been able to present before the Ag Committee. I used to staff this in Senate Ag, so it's good to be back. So House Bill 2541, this would establish 4 new funds within the state treasury. You would have the State Conservation Fund, the Working Lands Conservation Fund, the Wildlife Conservation Fund, and then the Kansas Outdoors Fund. So starting off with Section 1, this is the section that would govern establish the State Conservation Fund. The monies in the fund would be for the purpose to finance conservation programs. Monies credited to the fund would be used to supplement existing appropriations and would not be intended to supplement a state general fund or any special revenue fund appropriations to the Kansas Department of Agriculture or the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. The section authorizes the annual transfer from the state general fund to the state conservation fund in an amount of money equal to 50% of sales and use tax revenue credited to the state general fund from the sale of sporting goods, and this amount would be certified by the Secretary of Revenue. There is a definition of sporting goods. It's actually on page 2, lines 4 through 6 of the bill. And I will point out there's been some information that code there from the North American Industry Classification Code is actually a bit out of date. There are now some sporting good retailers that are under the new code. So if that's something that this committee wants to pursue, there may need to be an amendment there to perhaps include keep this old code and the new code to capture everybody. So then there's also then transfers that into the fund, but then there'll be transfers out of the State Conservation Fund to the 3 new funds that we'll discuss as well. 50% of the State Conservation Fund would be transferred each July 1st or July 15th, excuse me, from the State Conservation Fund to the Working Lands Conservation Fund, and then 25% of the balance in the State Conservation Fund would go to the Wildlife Conservation Fund. And then after making those prior transfers, the remaining balance would be transferred from the State Conservation Fund to the Kansas Outdoors Fund. So it's really kind of a 50, 25, 25 if you think of it that way. So moving into Section 2, this is where the Working Lands Conservation Fund is established. This fund would be administered by the Director of the Division of Conservation of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. The division is to adopt rules and regulations establishing a grant program for monies out of this fund. The Secretary of Ag would establish an external review panel that would meet at least twice a year to provide funding recommendations to the Division of Conservation. Public entities may submit grant applications for funding that would benefit the natural resources of the state by promoting conservation on working lands, and there'd be a priority placed on applications that have an opportunity to capture federal, private, or other non-state monies. It is intended that the monies allocated to this fund would be fully obligated to approve projects within 12 months and would be in addition to and not supplant existing appropriations And then there's also a definition of working lands provided in the bill to mean lands are used for farming, grazing, or production of forest products. So then Section 3 is the Wildlife Conservation Fund. This fund would be under the administration of the Secretary of Wildlife and Parks. The Secretary would adopt rules and regulations for a grant program, much like in the previous section. It would be the same kind of idea of these grants with a voluntary advisory board to oversee the grant program and provide funding recommendations as entities submit grant applications. Those applications would be for the benefit of natural resources of the state by promoting biodiversity or through practices established in the State Wildlife Action Plan. And again, with that priority, if they can leverage other federal or non-state dollars. Section 4 would be the Kansas Outdoors Fund. This would also be under the administration of the Secretary of Wildlife and Parks as part of the Parks Division of the department. And the Secretary would consult with the division to adopt the rules and regulations to administer the grant program with, again, a volunteer advisory board to make recommendations for funding application, grant funding. And this would be for the purposes of promoting outdoor access, environmental education, and recreation through practices established in the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. And then all of these would have a reporting requirement. Each of these funds would say on or before December 1st of each year, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Wildlife and Parks would submit a report to the legislature and to the governor. That includes an accounting of all monies expended from the funds, and explanations of and descriptions of the funding applications received and why certain projects or applications were not funded. And then finally, there's an additional transfer of money that would go into the State Conservation Fund. This would be coming from the Lottery Operating Fund. This would be 80% of the remaining monies credited concerning sports wagering revenues. That's currently, under current law, those monies go to the Attracting Professional Sports to Kansas Fund. This bill 2541 would change that to the State Conservation Fund. And then there would also be an additional transfer, annual transfer of $32 million from the Lottery Operating Fund to the State Conservation Fund by each year. So that's all that money would go into the State Conservation Fund. And again, those transfers out to the 3 other new funds being created that would actually be administered by the Department of Ag, Department of Wildlife and Parks. And the bill would become effective upon publication in the statute book, July 1st, 2024. That's when the first transfers and everything would start occurring. That would actually be fiscal year 2025. And I am available for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Questions on the explanation of the bill? Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You say that this would make up 4 new funds or 4 new expanded government funds?
Yeah. These would all be new funds within the Treasury. Like I said, kind of the conservation fund, it would sort of be the kind of the big, I guess, bucket, if you will, and then kind of out of that, the money would go down to these 3 funds, one under the Department of Ag and the other 2 under Wildlife and Parks.
Mr. Chair. So if this is 4 new funds, 4 new programs, how many FTEs would we have to hire more FTEs?
I'd have to defer that to the departments. I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Is there a fiscal note on this?
We'll have
Yeah.
that soon.
Okay.
It's now online too.
Yeah, I believe it just got posted online. That was from the Division of Budget. So, yeah.
Could you elaborate on page 1, line 35? It says that 50% of these funds would be taken out. That's being taken out from who?
Yeah, this would be the 50% of the tax revenue that's credited to the state general fund from the sale of sporting goods. So kind of those sporting good retailers. The Secretary of Revenue would have to certify how much it is each year. It wouldn't be a diversion, really. That tax revenue would be, it goes into the state general fund, and we're just saying an amount equal to that is coming out of the state general fund into the state conservation fund. So if the total revenue credited was, I'm just making this up, $10 million, then they'd come in and certify a $5 million transfer into the State Conservation Fund.
With doing this, would there be a shortfall in any particular program that 50% is coming out of?
That would be state general fund dollars, so I mean, it'd just be within any of the other programs that need or want state general fund money.
Okay. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
On page 9, line 29, you had mentioned the $32 million. Could you expound on why that $32 million is still in the lottery operating fund?
Oh, that's just the money that is, you know, the lottery revenues that are generated credited to the lottery operating fund, and then as that 32 million, that portion of that would then be transferred.
What's that money doing now? What is it funding something else, or is it?
I think some of that money is being used to, I mean, I'd probably defer some of this to the lottery, but I think, you know, there are prizes, of course, to get paid out of the lottery fund. And there's some other transfers that get made, and then ultimately any excess over the 50 million, I think, is then goes to state general fund. So in effect, so most likely there'll just be less money eventually transferred to the state general fund because it would be kind of captured by the state conservation fund.
I'll stop for now.
You'll have, I got a long list of folks, and so you can have them. Representative Gardner, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, if I understand this correctly, this is all funded out of state general fund money, but we're keying that off of sporting goods sales, sales tax and revenue from sports gambling. So we're actually asking those people to pay for this program. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Carlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Had a question on the advisory boards, and let me see, I don't know if I have the page number, but the first category has an advisory board that is, what's the words? Well, the second two are volunteer advisory boards. The other board is named something else. I can't see it right this moment.
Yeah, I believe that's the external review panel, yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so what are they, can you give a brief description of those and why one is called voluntary, two are called voluntary, one's not called voluntary? Does that mean they get paid? I just don't know.
Mr. Chairman, this language was what was requested, suggested by the proponents. I don't believe any of these are intended to be paid positions. I think some of it's just difference in terminology between like what Wildlife and Parks would see versus what the Department of Ag uses. But I think they're all just supposed to be, I don't believe there's any, even in the external review panel, I don't believe that there's no language in here that would provide compensation to that panel.
Well, the reason, when you talk about lottery people, a lot of those people are paid, so it kind of rang a bell with me on that. So the others are voluntary advisory boards. Can you explain those? Are they chosen by the governor? What's it?
The advisory board in section 3, let me see. That'd be page 4, lines 22 through 24. That'd be subsection C. It just says the Wildlife and Parks would establish a volunteer advisory board to oversee the grant program. It would be comprised of members representing industry and stakeholders. It's left at that, so I think it would be a lot of discretion to the department as to how the makeup of that body.
Okay, well, I can read those, but I just wondered if there was a difference between the first one and those two. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, there are no new taxes being established for these funds?
Yeah, there's not any tax being done. It's really just moving money within the state treasury from various funds, the lottery side and some state general fund dollars. And then that hits the conservation fund and it kind of flows through the other funds. So, yeah.
All right, very good. Thank you. Oh, one more for Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 2, new section 2, could you explain to me on line 43, who are the nonprofit entities shall be eligible to receive funding from the grant program? And what grant programs are those?
This would be the grant program that would be established up in subsection B. So this would be the conservation program, the grants that would use monies from the Working Lands Conservation Fund. There's not a definition of nonprofit entities in the bill, so it would really kind of have that input from the external review panel, and then ultimately what the Division of Conservation would make for those funding recommendations.
But like maybe nonprofit NGOs or something would be receiving taxpayer money to do their own projects, or?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know who or may be. I mean, I think they'll have to come through the rules and regs process with the department and this external review panel as they find applications. But yeah, I mean, it's not limited. It does say nonprofit entities there. So.
All right, thank you. Thank you, David, appreciate it. I'm going to call on Heather O'Hara right quick for the fiscal note. Any explanation if anybody else has any questions? I know we just received this right before, so it is up on online if you go to on the web page for the House Committee and committee documents, click today, and it's there. So Heather.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think there's a couple of questions that could be answered with this. So we're going to talk about the Department of Commerce, the Kansas Lottery, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Wildlife and Parks. Oh, I asked her. Didn't see it. And Department of Revenue. So the Department of Commerce states it has received one transfer of $4.1 million to the Attracting Professional Sports to Kansas Fund. If that transfer is ceased, obviously, they will not have more $4.1 million each year. According to the Kansas Lottery, the bill requires a transfer of $32 million into the newly created State Conservation Fund. And so in reaction, the bill would reduce the amount of funds transferred into the lottery operating fund into the state gaming revenue fund, and would also make the transfer to that revenue fund fall below the statutorily required $50 million. This would in turn reduce the transfers each year to the state general fund, the Economic Development Initiatives Fund, otherwise known as EDIF, the Correctional Institutions Building Fund, the CIBF, and the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund, the JADF, because we love our acronyms. Based on the consensus revenue estimates for FY 2025, the reductions would be about $21.5 million to the State General Fund, about $9 million to the EDIF, a little over $1 million to the CIBF, and $525,000 to the JADF. Because that $32 million transfer into the State Conservation Fund would short the statutorily $50 million transfer to the SGRF, the projected $1.65 million from sports wagering would typically transfer out of the SGF, and that would stay in the SGRF to shore up the statutory transfer in 25. So the shortfall to the State General Fund would be about $23 million in fiscal year 2025. Both the Department of Agriculture and Wildlife and Parks state that increasing expenditures would begin in FY25. The Department of Ag estimates it would require 1.5 FTE positions, and then their estimate of annual administrative expenditures would be $120,000 from that newly created State Conservation Fund starting in FY25. Wildlife and Parks estimates that it would require 2 FTE positions, one for the Wildlife Division and one for the Parks Division. And these positions would perform the same duties as the new positions in the Department of Ag. The agency estimate of annual administrative expenses would be about $132,000 from that new conservation fund. And then finally, the Department of Revenue estimates that based on actual retailer sales and compensating use tax collections from January of 21 through October of 23, the transfers into the new state conservation fund are estimated at $18.4 million for 25 and $18.5 million for 26. Any fiscal effect associated with the bill is not reflected in the governor's budget report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions for her right quick? Okay. You can look at that online, and again, all the testimony we have today. So let's get to it. I guess any other questions before we go? Okay. So let's start off with our proponents, and we will call on Representative Doug Blex. Now you can look at all of us from that standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. And I did have another bill I was going to introduce, but this last bill I introduced, I don't know. I don't think we need a bigger room, but thank you for that. It's an honor to, an opportunity to present to you guys. And I'm going to clear up a few rumors that we've seen a lot of internet traffic this past week. We've all received a lot of emails and Facebook notifications. And I guess for somebody that you want to blame, it's me. Not the chairman. I requested that the bill be on today with good intentions, not necessarily any advantage to the proponents or opponents, because I knew there would be a lot of people here already existing and would get out about 2 o'clock and would be perfect opportunity to hear their side. So there was no conspiracy involved. I had good intentions. I'm sorry for that. And nothing on the chairman. I actually asked him if he would do that, and he graciously did that. And certainly there was no intentions that we're going to push something through and run something through without, because I'm a firm believer in strong and transparency and hearing the other side of the both sides, really. So a little bit about myself. I grew up on a farm southeast Kansas, developed a passion for wildlife and the outdoors. I spent 35 years working for Nebraska and Kansas Game and Parks and Fish and Game. And I also had an opportunity to work for the Conservation District, which the minute I seen this bill, I realized that 50% of the funds went to the Conservation District. And I served on that for 9 years. There's 105 of those in every county in Kansas. They're volunteer, 5-member boards. I had the honor of serving as chairman for 6 years. And I quickly recognized there is a limited amount of funding. We pay those people terribly, underfunded, kind of a revolving door. So the minute I seen something that would divert 50% of the funds that would come out of some of the gaming and lottery, I jumped on this bill. I think it's a good bill, and basically it's conservation oriented, because if I had this bill and had southeast Kansas right now, we're still in that extreme drought. Digging out ponds, we could have had the conservation and producers that would benefit from this bill and this money to say dig out ponds, dealing with woody encroachment in the southern Flint Hills, having a cost share program. This is going to benefit farmers. I mean, I seen that right away, and so I support it. Now, is this bill perfect? No. I have a couple amendments I will probably introduce. It's in a draft situation, and I think we need to, but the purpose of today is to have the discussion. We're bringing this out, and I think the conservation districts do a great job throughout the state, and they certainly are in need of funding. Certainly we get over to wildlife and parks, there's issues there, but I think I've seen them handle money good. I've seen them handle sometimes money bad, but at the same token, there's a need for conservation. Most of our surrounding states have a conservation fund. This past year, with the great help of our chairman of the Water Committee, we got a historic water bill passed that mirrors kind of what we're doing here. Basically never been done before. It provides grants to state agencies, NGOs, to be able to work with water issues, cities, counties, et cetera. And I heard a lot of griping about the NGOs. Well, they're not accountable. One of my amendments will actually hopefully take care of that. I've heard quite a bit about the executive order, I don't know, 14008, commonly known as 3030 plan. I will introduce an amendment to say that none of this funds will be able to be used directly or indirectly. So I think that will cure a few things. I am also, in addition to my biology background, conservation district, I grew up on the family farm. I continue to run about a small cattle herd, about 75 mama cows, cow-calf. I farm, so I'm not necessarily a tree hugger. I understand conservation, not preservation. And so it becomes important to me to see the conservation issues that were there. So a little bit of background, and I'm not saying that to build myself up, but I feel like it's a good diversion to take the gaming funds, the lottery funds, and promote conservation in the state of Kansas. I mean, that's kind of we're not creating a new agency. Granted, we'll have some FTEs, and unfortunately, a lot of the state agencies are understaffed, and we found that out with the water bill. They're dealing with an issue of $17 million in money, and they got to prioritize $380 million in grant applications. We allowed 2 FTEs for that, and they're still overwhelmed. So NGOs, however we like them or not, are a necessary part of the equation because we got 30% of our state employees staying home. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's the reality. And most of the agencies are short-staffed. So NGOs will have to come into this play. And how do we get the accountability with them? Maybe one of my amendments will help. They need to be subject to the Freedom of Information Act as well as the Kansas Open Meetings Law. So with that, that's kind of my spiel. I think it's a good bill. It will benefit conservation in the long term. It's something that's well overdue. Most of our surrounding states have some form of money dedicated to conservation. Our neighboring state of Missouri has a percentage of the sales tax that funds very programs just like what we're talking about. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, members of the audience, and with that, I stand to questions in the appropriate time.
Questions, Representative Blex? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Justin Cobb, Kansans for Conservation. Thanks for being back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for this opportunity to provide testimony in support of House Bill 2541. As Mr. Chairman said, my name is Justin Cobb on behalf of Kansans for Conservation today. I'd like today to talk a little bit about what Kansans for Conservation is, the coalition, and the process that it embarked upon to draft House Bill 2541. So the coalition began in 2017. It's about 7 years ago, and it began with the convening of a group of organizations across Kansas who really came together to discuss the lack of available match for federal programs and other funding opportunities. These are programs that most of them are available permanently and offer hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And a lot of times these programs have match that non-state entities, private citizens, or private organizations simply can't provide. Now, most of the attendees at this meeting had the privilege of working across state lines, some of those states that Representative Blex mentioned, where they had access to state support and state funding for these types of projects. And it was this deficit that established the coalition's mission to remedy that, and it's the one that stands today. In pursuing its mission, the coalition undertook multiple needs assessments to determine the areas and scale requisite to appropriately fund conservation in Kansas. The most recent one was conducted in early 2023. Its goal was to balance the state's areas of greatest need with the highest available non-state match opportunities. In conjunction with this effort, the coalition conducted comparative analyses of other states with such funding. Now, Kansas is one of only 15 states that does not have dedicated funding for conservation. So there are a lot of examples to learn from. There are 35 other states that do it. There are 35 other ways of funding it and of structuring it. So after we conducted these needs assessments, these comparative analyses, we began the drafting process for House Bill 2541. Now, embarking this drafting process, 3 principles were quickly identified that the coalition sought to follow. The first one was no new government. Second one was no new taxes or fees. And last, we sought to streamline funding. Coalition believes that the existing state agency structure is sufficient and provides the capacity and expertise to administer these funds without a new entity. Additionally, it is the coalition's stance that there are surpluses or inefficiencies within existing state revenues that can be adjusted to invest into conservation and achieve a higher return on a crucial infrastructure issue. To guide these decisions on funding, the coalition relied heavily on public polling and included in House Bill 2541 the three most popular conservation funding sources as identified by Kansans. Lastly, the coalition has worked closely with the Departments of Agriculture and Wildlife and Parks to adopt a structure that will be limited in bureaucracy and efficient in implementing funding into on-the-ground conservation. Now, as you examine the span of the coalition's 33 member organizations, you're going to see a breadth of diversity that is unlike any political organization that you may see. The organizations representing agriculture, energy, wildlife, parks, and more came together on House Bill 2541 because conservation is a core and essential value to all these organizations. Just as these organizations committed to working with each other through their differences to draft this bill, we also commit to you all to work with this committee on any issues that you may have. To accommodate the time for today's hearing, we have narrowed our member testimony to 4 organizations who are leaders in agriculture, soil health, wildlife conservation, and outdoor recreation, and will discuss how this bill supports the success of their respective sectors. As Representative Blex also mentioned, we'd like to thank the Chairman Rogers for arranging this hearing during the Coalition's Day at the Capitol and enabling our supporters, most of which are working professionals in their fields, to make the most of their trip to Topeka. Hopefully all of the committee members had the opportunity to meet with some of them today, and if not, many of them will be available after the hearing to provide their perspective on House Bill 2541. Thank you once again for your consideration of House Bill 2541, and I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Questions for Mr. Cobb? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of the opponents of this bill, one of their arguments is that more land conservation will lead to less agriculture production, which will lead to less food production, and that could ultimately lead to food shortages. And so what is your response to that argument?
Thank you, Representative Fairchild. That's actually a concern that is core to the coalition. I'm going to be followed shortly by Mr. Josh Rowe, who's going to speak directly from producers and why this type of conservation is needed to ensure that we can continue to provide for agricultural lands in Kansas. This type of private conservation on privately held productive lands is what we consider to be key for producers for the future of sustainable production.
Okay. Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Justin, for your explanation of that. Does this bill, House Bill 2541, provide any funding for programs through the Executive Order 14008, which is commonly known as the 3030?
No, the coalition's work is independent and predates that policy.
Thank you for that.
Other questions? Seeing none? Thank you. We might retain at the end if there are any in our time. Okay. And before I call Mr. Rupp, just right quick, I just want folks to know as well, we will have a lot of written testimony. It was my call to not have each organization come up individually. I think we'll hear from these 4 or 5, the broad from the coalition, and that's why. That was my call, instead of saying, well, we can be here till 7 o'clock tonight if you want. But we wanted to do that. So just so you're aware. Up next to Josh Rowe. Looks like from representing a group of the ag groups today.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chairman Rogers, members of the committee. My name is Josh Rowe. I serve as the CEO of Kansas Corn, and I'm speaking on behalf of 3 of the agricultural groups that are members of Kansas for Conservation, the Kansas Corn Growers Association, Kansas Farm Bureau, and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. I submitted 3 pages of testimony, has a lot of information. I know there's a lot of conferees here today, so I'd like to just boil down to kind of 3 main points that we would like to bring forward. First, as said before, you know, Kansas really is missing out, one of 15 states without this dedicated funding, including every one of our bordering states that has a good program. Probably the second and most important part of this is the focus on working lands conservation through that. So that is, you know, our ag lands are great. They have multiple uses for it. So it's about optimizing our crop and livestock production while also having a conservation program through there. I work closely a lot with my counterparts up in South Dakota with South Dakota Corn, and they are integral partners in this. If you look over the years, their agriculture, their livestock production has blossomed, and they've maintained a very strong economy for especially upland birds hunting through there. Two such programs that I just thought I'd bring up real quick. They have a program through there available to farmers. It's called Making Every Acre Count, and it helps producers optimize agricultural productions and some conservation programs through that. And the service it actually provides is it takes their data and gives them a profit and loss on every acre of their ground that they have to see, what programs make the most sense, where it does in that. That's one such good there. Another interesting one, not saying this would ever would have to go through the process in Kansas that we thought, but they've also instituted what's called a predator bounty program through there. Lots of predators, raccoons, coyotes on the landscape out there have had adverse impacts on our bird population. They also, limited value out of those hides or pelts anymore. It's kept trapping of predators down. And they actually pay hunters a bounty of $10 for that. So just two really unique programs that came out of South Dakota because of this flexible program. And just my third and last point is just the pure economics through there. And this was the main reason Kansas Corn Growers Association joined this coalition. As our board members, I'm just going to specifically call out Tanner McNitch, and he operates farms in Representative Minix's district there, and just talks about years ago, it was opening pheasant season, and throughout the time, just having droves of out-of-state hunters coming in. All the hotels were full. The local churches, community organizations made a good amount of their budget for the year, feeding the hunters and providing other things like that. So recognizing the importance of ag production, but the extra economic development that's no longer occurring. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Rowe? Seeing none, thank you. Up next, Dan Meyerhoff, Kansas Association of Conservation Districts. Back to committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dan Meyerhoff, and I'm the Executive Director for the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, also known as KACD. We represent the 105 individual conservation districts across Kansas, which is comprised of 525 volunteer board members that serve on those district boards. We appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 2541 on behalf of KACD. Our mission statement and the mission statement of our member districts is providing local leadership to protect and improve Kansas natural resources through collaboration, education, and implementation. And holding true to that mission statement, districts collaborate with a myriad of local, state, federal agencies and NGOs, those non-governmental organizations, to identify resource issues and prioritize actions and initiatives to address natural resource needs. We've been an active member of the Kansas Coalition, our Conservation Coalition, since the first meeting. We know that we can achieve a lot more working together with all these organizations because we all have common goals. Protection of our working lands is essential to sustain and improve our natural resources, whether it be water quantity and quality, whether it be soil health, drought resilience, productive rangelands, and diverse wildlife habitats. These are all critical to sustaining our family farms and ranches environmentally and economically, as well as improving our quality of life. Conservation districts are a primary local contact for our farmers and ranchers wanting to address their resource concerns on the 46 million plus acres of farm and ranch land that we have in Kansas. In the 95 counties where there's a USDA service center, conservation districts are co-located, and we work with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, also known as NRCS, to deliver a lot of federal programs. And as has been mentioned, a lot of those federal programs require a non-federal match. For example, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. as being well used in Kansas. Some examples are the Milford RCPP. Kansas Water Office is the lead partner, gets funding from the federal government. We provide non-federal funds. There's 30-plus partners, which are made up of agencies and NGOs, implementing that RCPP. Another one is in western Kansas. It's called the Groundwater Restoration and Sustainability Project, or GRASP. The purpose or main objective for that RCP project is to protect the municipal water supplies of the cities of Tribune and Leoti. The Playa Lakes Joint Venture, an NGO, and ks.gov are the lead partners there, along with KDA, the Water Office, and a lot of other organizations. And most recently, the Kansas High Plains Aquifer RCPP, which KDA DOC is the lead partner, working closely with the Kansas Water Office. We're using state water plan funds, some of the funds from the water bill that was passed last year, and bringing in $25 million in federal funds to address irrigation needs and helping our producers, our irrigators in western Kansas. And this is both technical and financial assistance, working with the conservation districts and the groundwater management districts to deliver that program. So, there's lots of other needs too, and we're leaving a tremendous amount, millions of federal dollars on the table because we don't have the non-federal match to bring those dollars in. Think of your return on investment when you're bringing in federal dollars from that match that in turn goes to protect our natural resources. And when we talk about need, I was visiting with the Kansas Assistant State Conservationist for Programs. She stated that last year alone, there was $86 million in unfunded EQIP, or Environmental Quality Incentive Program, applications in Kansas. Now, that's folks that applied for money, and there wasn't enough money to go around. That doesn't include the folks that maybe have a resource need and didn't apply. So that underscores the critical importance of additional funding for conservation programs. And then there are those producers that really don't feel comfortable working with federal agencies. They would much rather work with a state agency in their local conservation district. State cost share programs tend to be a little less bureaucratic, have less paperwork, and especially when addressing resource needs on small family farms or applying a single conservation practice. Those state programs are just a lot easier to maneuver through and work with. And let's talk about the importance of funding for conservation education and outreach. Districts work with a lot of our partners in reaching thousands of elementary and high school students each year, educating the future generations on the importance of sustaining and protecting our natural resources. Adult education is also critical. There's new research and new technologies that are becoming available, and this is not only necessary for our active producers. There is an increasing number of absentee landowners that just may not be as connected to the land and don't understand the need for protecting their natural resources. So with that, stewardship and responsible management of our working lands is the responsibility of all of us. Conservation funding to promote long-term sustainability and resilience of our working lands, it's not an expense, it is an investment. Conservation districts, we stand ready to do our part, implementing conservation programs and providing technical assistance to our farmers and ranchers through the opportunities that would be provided by House Bill 2541. We see it as a win-win for everyone. HB 2541 protects our environment, improves economic stability, and really it enhances the quality of life for all Kansans. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to testify this afternoon and look forward to working with you to fund conservation in Kansas. And with that, I stand ready to answer questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Meyerhoff. Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This could go to anybody who wants to answer this on the proponent side. My understanding, and this is just a guess, so I don't have any hard data, but my guess is most of the sales that happen at sporting goods stores are probably in urban or suburban Kansas. I take her to Bass Pro all the time to look at the aquariums, right? So would the net effect of this bill, if it did pass, it would essentially just be an outflow of money from urban, suburban Kansas into rural Kansas to promote conservation in rural areas primarily, right?
I guess I'm not sure I'm the expert to answer that question. You ought to see what I spend in the sporting goods stores, and I'm from Hayes. But I would have to defer to somebody else as far as where those dollars are actually going to come from. But I understand your point. Absolutely.
Okay, other questions? Hey, I guess, Mike, is that wrong? Send money to rural Kansas?
Of course,
We could be here for another hour.
if you're from western Kansas, they probably don't consider Hayes as rural, but
Right. And when I go to Johnson County, I think that sales tax stays there. Oh. That, I guess, western Kansas pays for all the Johnson County infrastructure. Oh, not all of it, but some of us vote for it. No, I'm just, no, good point. And I think, is there anybody, but we have two more, and then if somebody wants to pick that up, maybe after, before we move on. Representative Jacobs, you got a question? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 4 of the bill, I don't know if you have it in front of you.
my assistant handed me one.
On page 4, line 40, 41, 42, it talks about increasing the access to diverse, high-quality, privately owned native grassland habitat for hunting through the expansion of walk-in hunting. So are we taking taxpayers' resources and opening up, paying somebody else to till their land or no-till or plant whatever, and then that person is charging hunters to come in and making revenue off of that?
Well, I'm not familiar with this part since it's under the wildlife part, but, you know, from my standpoint, you know, increasing access to privately owned land, you know, there is a standing walk-in hunting program that is funded. Right. You've got private landowners that, you know, have the right to, you know, not let anybody hunt, you know, give people permission to hunt, enter into walk-in hunting, lease it to hunters, but, you know, that's a private property right, and I'm not going to get in the middle of that.
Well, it seems like we are if we're giving taxpayer money to benefit the private person.
Well, that's walk-in hunting is a standing program, and I guess I would defer to one of the wildlife folks to talk about that program.
Representative Jacobs, you want to hang just a second, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the walk-in hunting area wouldn't be anything new. I mean, that's a lease program, just like if I lease land from someone, if I lease land from Doug to hunt on, walk-in hunting is just that we're opening that for the public, and public hunting land is very limited. And it's actually, when we talk about deer populations and things like that, destroying crops and hitting cars, the biggest issue is that we don't have access for local hunters to hunt. So walk-in hunting allows more local people to hunt and control that deer population. So I think when you look at something from a public good that's broader than just, I think we're too narrow to say, are we using taxpayer money for one thing? That'd be me complaining about roads that I never drive on. Like, we're using money for a public good.
That roads are one of the functions of government, though, so.
So is the public good.
What, define public good.
Well, we can.
Representative Jacobs, any other questions? Okay. Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Meyerhoff? Seeing none, thank you. I'll retain for possibly questions. And again, we'll look. Okay, up next is Erica DeVore, Kansas Recreation Park Association. Welcome back to committee. I think you've been here before. Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Erica DeVore. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Recreation and Park Association, and we represent over 1,400 members working in the park and recreation industry across the state. Outdoor recreation is a continually growing segment of the services that our members provide. Outdoor recreation is made possible through Kansas public lands and waters, and supporting the outdoor recreation economy includes conserving these lands and waters. To ensure that the outdoor recreation economy continues to grow and thrive, it is essential to manage and invest in our Kansas parks, trails, and waters. And the success of this industry depends on providing outdoor recreation opportunities for everyone. At the core of the outdoor recreation economy is the outdoor recreation consumer. And this consumer this has expanded, especially since COVID. Today's outdoor recreators are expecting outdoor experiences anywhere from their backyard to the backcountry. And it's all ages, all ethnicities, all income levels. It runs across all throughout Kansas. The outdoor recreation is part of their daily lives now, leading them to fill their barns and their garages with bicycles, backpacks, boats, saddles, tents, hunting rifles, and fishing gear. And I could go on and on about outdoor recreation. In 2022, the outdoor recreation economy in Kansas generated over 36,000 jobs and $3.9 billion in total added value. Nationally, the total added value was $564 billion. And to give the significance to that number, the same year, air transportation added value was only $173 billion. It's a very huge industry that Kansas needs to take advantage of. Many towns and cities across the state of Kansas are now looking for ways to improve quality of life in their communities, and they're turning to parks and recreation because well-maintained parks and recreation instill a sense of pride among all their residents because they're symbols of a vibrant and welcoming community. In the Wichita area, for instance, the smaller towns around Park City, Mays, Hayesville, Bel Air, Rose Hill, Derby, they're all known for their park and recreation systems. They've decided to invest in them, and they have all had a population increase of 2 to 40% in the last 10 years. Similarly, in the Kansas City metro, towns like Bonner Springs, DeSoto, Eudora, Tonganoxie, Gardner, and even further out, Wellsville, Lewisburg, Paola, they have all decided to invest in parks and recreation, and they too have seen a population growth of 2 to 33% in the last decade. I have numerous examples of how this outdoor recreation fund could help Kansans, but I'm going to give you two that would be pretty immediate. One is in the city of Coffeyville. They have a trail master plan that they have developed, and the key leaders in Coffeyville know that they need a better quality of life to keep their young people there. However, the funding is very limited in Coffeyville, and they really don't have any other access to money to help implement that trail plan, and so the progress on implementing it is slow. The second one is upcoming as well. From the former Sunflower Ammunition Plant site, Johnson County Park and Rec District will receive 2,000 acres of the site, which is adjacent to Kill Creek Park, bringing it to nearly 3,000 acres. Master planning is already underway, but this site has the potential to be a regionally or even nationally sought-out recreation area, bringing enormous economic impact to the area. The fund will also help with the unmet need of Land, Water, and Conservation Fund and Recreational Trails grants, which are true federal grants that come into the state. We never are able to fill those. In addition, the backlog of projects in our state parks is significant. Outdoor recreation benefits the state economically, improves our quality of life, and equally important, improves the health of Kansans. There are now an increasing number of pediatricians giving children park prescriptions, a growing body of evidence that nature and being outdoors improves our mental health. Outdoor recreation is integral to the health of Kansas. By providing accessible opportunities for physical activity, it contributes to improved health outcomes. But beyond the individual health, investing in outdoor recreation positively impacts the state's economy by attracting tourists, supporting our local businesses, and contributing to a vibrant and active population. A more diverse economy is a healthier economy. I encourage you all to take a look at our bill, and I'm asking for your support. I'll stand for any questions.
Question, Mr. Boer. Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Erica, for your testimony. The topic of a lot of the emails was a big concern, and I also share that when a state or federal gives a grant to an NGO, non-government organization, that some of the Freedom from Information Act procedures and maybe Kansas Open Records Act kind of go away, and they have a hard time finding out how that NGO is spending the money. You guys are a 501c3, correct? So can you explain how you operate and just where we're at on that?
Yeah, we are actually a 501c6, but how that would work, when we were putting this bill together, we were really looking at Land, Water, and Conservation Fund and recreational trails grants and how they operate in the state of Kansas. And they do have advisory boards already that help decide on the grants. Once the grants are given out, it is open records, but you can also find it on the website. And this will be exactly the same thing. So you would be able to see where that money went pretty easily. It's pretty easily accessible.
So as a follow-up, if I come in as a private citizen and is concerned about what's going on, I could make a request and receive that information?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm thinking about that, I've heard that enough from some pretty knowledgeable people that, maybe with this draft bill, possibly put an amendment in it to make sure that they have access to those expenditures, because technically it is public money, even though, an NGO is doing it. So that was kind of my line of thought. Thank you.
Yes, it'd be very transparent and easily accessible.
Representative Murphy?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe not so much of a question, but something to consider. We're talking about federal money here. Lots of time, well, not lots of times, every time federal money comes, it comes with strings. And we see that while there's good intentions lots of times, we see it in our education, we see it in our medical, everything else, that ends up hanging us up later on. And I think we need to be really careful before we start saying, okay, well, we're going to take this money, and then we may be stuck with having to do something we don't want. And so that's all I'm just saying, I think we need to be careful as we go forward about that.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Up next, Abe Lawler with Ducks Unlimited. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important issue. My name is Abe Lawler, and I am a biologist based in Garden City, Kansas. I'm a born and raised Kansan that grew up in Derby, and like many Kansans, I grew up with an interest in conservation and a passion for the outdoors. With that interest, I decided to pursue and obtain a career in this field. With that passion, it has led me to become the chair for the Upper Arkansas River Regional Advisory Committee, chair for the Finney County Conservation District, and the president of the Arkansas River Watershed Group. I'm here today to testify in support of House Bill 2541 on behalf of 15,000 Kansas Ducks Unlimited members and over 650,000 national Ducks Unlimited members. Ducks Unlimited is a science-based conservation organization that works to protect, enhance, and restore wetlands for waterfowl, wildlife, and people. As most of you know, Kansas is a central stopover state for migratory birds during their fall, but more importantly, their spring migration. Having these wetlands function properly, combined with upland habitats of the prairie, Kansas can and has provided a world-class wildlife resource that attracts tens of thousands of birders, hunters, and outdoor enthusiasts from across the country that generates millions of dollars for the Kansas economy. In Kansas, that is a state that's 98% privately owned. We have to acknowledge that wildlife exists through the cooperation and participation of Kansas farmers and ranchers that share similar interests of conservation, enjoy the outdoors, and share these opportunities with others. In a privately owned agricultural landscape like Kansas, habitat conservation is a product of private-public partnership through voluntary and incentive-based programs. Ducks Unlimited and partners have worked hand-in-hand with landowners through these programs to improve working farms and ranches' bottom lines while increasing wildlife habitat and provide access for sportsmen and women. Some of these federal programs are the Farm Bill, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the North America Wetlands Conservation Act. These programs can provide resources and options for landowners to implement conservation practices in their operations, which can improve soil health, water quality, and quantity while providing excellent wildlife habitat. I'm going to apologize here real quick for this acronym soup that I'm about to give you, but some of these programs are CRP, ALE, CSP, RCPP, NACA, NIFWIP, EQIP. The list can go on and on and on. But a lot of these programs share some similar themes. One, that they're popular with landowners, and two, they typically require non-federal match, which is one of the problems we have here in Kansas. This lack of non-federal match for these conservation programs is our biggest challenge. We, Ducks Unlimited, typically tell Kansas landowners for a wetland project, it will cost them 50 cents on the dollar to complete that project. But this state-based conservation fund could help provide some of that match for these federal programs. The funding proposed in House Bill 2541 would help so many more Kansas landowners incorporate conservation in their operations and continue to support the state's natural resources for future generations. I'd like to provide a few examples of some of the work that we're doing throughout the state and how this funding proposed in this bill would help those efforts. In western Kansas, where I live, I work with many private landowners through Farm Bill programs that help producers restore these landscape features called playa lakes. Playas are shallow, temporary wetlands that are not only important for migratory birds and local wildlife, but they're also important to people in the fact that they are replenishing the Ogallala aquifer. There are over 22,000 playas scattered throughout the high plains, and when they're working properly or functioning properly, and we get average rainfall in western Kansas, they recharge the aquifer to the tune of over 6 billion gallons of water annually. I've been working with landowners in western Kansas for several years now, and many didn't realize the benefits of restored playas to wildlife and people regarding the recharge value. With this knowledge and education, there has been a growing interest in USDA programs to conserve playa lakes, but one of the biggest reasons why some producers are hesitant to conserve their playas is the out-of-pocket cost of restoration, or i.e. cost share, which could be addressed through the state-based fund like the one proposed in this bill. Ducks Unlimited has also been involved in a water quality and recreational projects with Kansas municipalities, all of who would be eligible for funding under House Bill 2541. For example, in South Central Kansas, DU has been working with the City of Wellington, KDH&E, EPA, and Wildlife and Parks on a wetland project to treat runoff into the Wellington Lake. Once restored and enhanced and managed properly, this property will have functioning wetlands that will improve the water quality going into Wellington Lake, which is also one of the city's drinking water sources. Last example here is a project that DU has partnered on the R. Michael Rhodes Wetland Park in Newton, Kansas, near the Newton wastewater treatment plant. This project features functioning wetlands, walking paths, boardwalks, education signs, custom murals, wildlife viewing, and a very unique birding by ear elements for visually impaired visitors. House Bill 2541 could provide resources for more local communities to improve water quality and provide additional outdoor recreational opportunities. Ducks Unlimited has been a member of the Kansas for Conservation Coalition since the inception because state-based conservation funding has been a critical component for our habitat work across the country. Similar state-based conservation funding, such as the Nebraska Environmental Trust, NET, and Great Outdoors Colorado, GOCO, can potentially provide non-federal match. By every dollar invested by NET and GOCO, they can gain an additional $2 to $3 of additional private and federal funding projects or conservation projects. NET has been critical for Nebraska's water quality and quantity projects, ranging from stream restoration to irrigation technologies to sustain the Ogallala aquifer. GOCO has been an important resource for improving and expanding hunting access on existing state wildlife areas, and these funds have also provided a boost in local rural economies where most of these projects take place. Ducks Unlimited has supported dedicated conservation funding in many states across the country and applauds the Kansas Legislature for considering this unprecedented commitment to funding critical quality of life infrastructure. Investments in conservation, working lands, recreation, and outdoor recreation are investments in the future of Kansas. Thank you for your time and your consideration on this important issue. With that, I'll try to answer your questions.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Lawler? Seeing none, thank you. Retain you maybe for later. What we'll do is that question that Representative Shue had, we're going to defer that till the end for everyone. We know we've got some other opponents that have other appointments, so we want to keep that going. Just committee want to let you know the written only proponents, Alfonso Levia from the Kansas Wildlife Federation, Barth Crouch Ranchland Trust of Kansas, Ben Postlewaite Nature Conservancy, Clark H. Cohn, David Kraft, Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition, Don Bueller, Friends of the Call, Ellen Parker, Water One, Aaron Sandquist, Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, Floyd Schmidt, Kansas Forestry Association, J.D. Moore Conservation Fund, Jackie Augustine, Alabama, Kansas, James Millicipher, Redneck Classics Incorporated, Jennifer Similake, Kansas Soil Health Alliance, Caitlin Stanley, Kansas Land Trust, Kurt Ratzloff, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Laura Downey, Kansas Association of Conservation and Environmental Education, Mallory Lutz, Kansas Food and Farm Coalition, Matt Smith, Playa Lakes Joint Venture, Nick Lewandowski, Kansas Farmers Union, Olivia Bergmeyer, State Association of Watersheds, Sarah Hill Nelson, of Our Sox Mills and Power Company, Tom Bueller, Kansas Rural Center, William F. Bradley, Brad, from Farm Tender, and Zach Pastora, Kansas Sierra Club. I said those fast so we get in the record and not bore you. If you've ever listened to the Fed in Congress, how they read things in, they read them in, but you can't understand them. So, okay, let's move on. In the written only for neutral is Brad Lovelace, Secretary of Kansas Wildlife and Parks. So that is available too on the drive, on our site. And now we'll go to oral opponent. I guess, is there anybody else here to testify as a proponent? Seeing none, let's go to opponents, oral opponents. First up, Aaron Popelka, the Kansas Livestock Association. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be here first time this year. I'm Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association. We appear today with a few concerns that we think could easily be taken care of. And probably for an opponent, I'm going to do an unusual thing and talk about some of the good things in the bill, some things we support, and the reason why, with some tweaks, we'd be supportive of it. KLA has policy supporting working lands conservation. In particular, one of the policies we have supports state legislation creating a Kansas conservation easement funding source. One of the affiliated entities at KLA we have is Ranchland Trust of Kansas. It was started by ranchers, for ranchers, that wanted to preserve native grasslands areas like the Flint Hills, Red Hills, Smoky Hills. At the time, they felt like they needed a land trust to hold conservation easements that were run by ranchers and could be trusted. In fulfilling that mission, the need or the desire to do these outstrips the funding available. And part of it is many of the federal grants has federal money. The private entity puts up some money, and usually there needs to be a state share in some of these. And so it's inhibited some of these. And so we would support that general goal, not just on conservation easements, but some of the things Mr. Meyerhoff, Mr. Rowe talked about as well. 2 points, though, that we think need to be fixed in this bill to get us in support. One is on page 3, line 6. The bill authorizes a purposed grazing land rest, rotation, and management. This is one of those things where in practice we've run into issue, particularly with federal working lands conservation programs, and the 2 words that we'd like taken out are rest and rotation. I think grazing management conservation is fine. Native grasslands, I think most data would support grazing being there. It's the words rest and rotation where sometimes, particularly at the federal level, they concentrate on rest, and instead of including cattle or other ruminants as a tool to manage rangeland, they're taken off. So we think to appropriately focus, those 2 words probably need to come out. The second piece deals with new policy we adopted this year at convention, and this is from the observations and experience of our members, and that deals with the ability of state agencies, particularly wildlife and parks, to buy fee simple land acquisitions, which is contained in the bill. If you look at sections 2, 3, and 4, subsection H. The policy we adopted this year states, and I'll read it for you, the Kansas Livestock Association opposes the purchase or acquisition of additional land by the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. Most of that is due to the fact that the land they have now is not appropriately managed. It has noxious weeds, invasive species, and not that they don't try. I do know that the department in many instances is trying the best they can in some of those to manage that. They just don't have the resources. And in fact, I've included in the testimony that we believe that there are budget dollars available, and perhaps this bill could be a way to do it, that those dollars be used to restore and rehabilitate those lands to bring them back to native grassland species before the department goes and acquires any more. And so If we change subsection H, delete it as it reads now, and put fee simple land acquisition, acquisitions by a state agency shall be prohibited, we'd then be able to support the bill, but as it's drafted now, cannot. So, Mr. Chairman, those are our brief concerns and would certainly stand for any questions that the committee might have.
Questions for Mr. Popelka? Representative Blex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Aaron. So on the acquisition, currently the state of Kansas Wildlife and Parks must have legislative approval if they buy anything more than 160, unless it's in southeast Kansas where it's under the mining damage complaint, they can go up to a section of land. So what you're saying, if we had 100 acres adjacent to an existing wildlife area that would possibly round out it, that KLA would be against that?
As our policy is that I read to you as stated, that we would oppose it. And yes, I do realize that there is state statute that says that if it's over 160, they need legislative permission. We would disagree with that. We think the number ought to be 0. Until they get to the point, and again, this gets to remediating lands that exist. I can point to you numerous properties that need restoration, but the dollars aren't there yet. We still get proposals to purchase more land, and that is, and again, this is an error. This is our members at convention discussed this and adopted this policy based on their experiences.
One more. Well, my own personal opinion is the fact that management abilities in the eyes of the beholder. I run cow-calf, and I drive by neighbors. Of course, everywhere's that way in southeast Kansas because of the drought, but I drive by neighbors that graze their ground into nothing and are bad stewards. And yet, you know, I try to maintain the best I can in a rotation and a pattern there. So I guess I don't like the idea of picking winners and losers. The fact that, and that's kind of what that philosophy would do. In other words, if you know, and like I say, I'm cow-calf man, but I got land out there that just because I don't run it through a cow or turn it under doesn't mean it's bad, because I've got grandkids and great-grandkids shooting deer on it. So that's just as important to me and economically as some of the other stuff. So I guess I'll stand pretty firm on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Mr. Chairman, I certainly respect that, and I can point to you neighbors privately that mismanage land, and as I drive by, I say, you know, I'd sure probably do it better. But I think in terms of our state agencies and tax dollars, we ought to expect more. We shouldn't let them, default to not managing it the best. But certainly understand where you're coming from, Representative Blex.
Other questions, Mr. Popelka? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate it. We will go on next to Angel Cushing from Allen. Angel's been here probably longer than most of us today in the building, so thanks for back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand in opposition to this bill. Primarily, $23 million. I can think of a lot better things to do with that money. That $23 million in this program that would have to come out of the general budget to make up the difference for 2025 cannot buy shoes for children. It does not save any of the hospitals in the state. It does not solve any of the tax problems that we are dealing with now. My understanding is we are trying to reduce taxes, not increase them. Furthermore, I cannot elect anybody on any of these NGOs that would be in charge of implementing these plans. I do not go into the voting booth in November. I do not cast a vote for anybody in Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, or any of those organizations. My understanding, the state of Kansas is the largest landowner in the state of Kansas. I would ask how much more money or how much more land do they need? What is that point of enough? They have enough. If we have a problem with recreation, why are we not expanding recreation on a lot of those park lands, Corps of Engineer lands, and other lands that have been closed off as preserves in our state? I have a really, really hard time with the whole premise of this idea. The premise of this idea, and what I've heard a lot about today, is how we need to educate, 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 educate. That means y'all think I'm stupid, or at least they do. They think that I'm stupid and not capable of managing my own land, and I need to be educated. And I would like to ask how many of them, people from the city, actually know more about my piece of property or my goat than I do. My goats, as you suggested, Mr. Blex, love weeds. I love my grass short. I rotate horses in there. Horses have upper and lower teeth for those that live in the city, which means they can go all the way down to the grass and they can pull out that root if you let them. So most people have them in paddocks, unless you're the federal government and you have a whole bunch of them running wild all over federal lands out west. So after I let them cut that short, instead of having to burn my pastures in the spring, I allow them to cut that short, let them weeds grow up, which feed my goats. Some of the conservation problems that I have is Lespedeza. While y'all call that a noxious weed, that's the best food in the entire world for my goats. But it's very, very hard for me to get a hold of because most land is required to cut it or burn it or spray it. They cannot bale it and sell it to me. That becomes an obstacle that would normally, without the federal regulation and oversight, would be easy for me to find. It's actually rather difficult. I am absolutely in opposition to this. I think that the money can be spent better elsewhere, and I'm getting really tired of people living in the city telling me how to run my farm in the country. And I stand for questions. Thank you.
Any questions, Ms. Cushing? If not, it will be retained at the end. So, very good. Thank you. Up next, Amy Sipple. Welcome to committee.
Thank you so much. Amy Seipel, Chairman and committee members, thank you for allowing me to testify today. So when a catfish in my pond sees a worm dangling in the water, he should be thinking, this is too good to be true. He doesn't recognize that fact, however, until a hook is lodged deep in his mouth and he's been stripped of all of his freedom. Likewise, we should consider, as you said wisely, Representative Murphy, that when the federal government dangles money in front of the states, there are likely hooks attached to those. In fact, the federal government gave $27 billion to the Department of Agriculture through the Build Back Better program. And Ag Secretary Vilsack said that this could lead to 100 million more acres pulled into conservation. Now, you may say that House Bill 2541 is not part of the 30 by 30 initiative, but if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, I'm just saying. It may be an issue of semantics and other programs that are out there, but certainly programs like this are designed to pull more of our land into conservation. And this aligns perfectly with the administration's statements. Of course, an executive order was signed as soon as he began his reign, saying that he was going to pull 30% more of our land and water into the federal government control. And by 2050, it's 50%. This also goes along with the UN agenda of 2030 of pulling out more of our land out of private control and putting it into government control. You have been elected to lead and to serve us during such a time as this. Protect private ownership and management of the heartland. Don't fall for the hook. It is likely going to be accompanied by stripping our freedom away from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Seipel. Any questions? Stand for questions?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And one, okay, so you're a board member of what? Of what?
I am just a homeowner. I am a landowner.
I'm sorry, you said something about board member. Okay, I must have missed that. That's fine.
I don't think so.
Because it shows her just as a landowner. That's fine.
Yes.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Amy, for testifying. When I read the proponents, we have 30 proponents in all, and most of them are this foundation or this coalition or this alliance and this venture or whatever. But yet, here you are, Kansas landowner, and I see that we only have 3 oral opponents, where we have pretty much 3 against the coalition.
Right.
When did you find out about this hearing?
Exactly. It was, and we have to take off work to do it at a moment's notice when ICE is on the road and I live in Harvey County. Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to stop right now. I'm not going to go down that road. This was done, there's a long way to go. The reason why, who knows? This bill was proposed by this coalition. The hearing was going to be held because they were here. There's no malice in this. There's no hiding anything. This is one step of several. And I will not tolerate that you think this is some sort of shenanigan by anybody, proposal or opponent, that this is any sort of some sort of a rush through. I do apologize. We didn't have 1,000 people. And you know what? There's still time. So I will not entertain that to try to create anything that this is some sort of a rush through. I will not.
And that was not part of my testimony. I think we're just explaining here why there's not more of us.
Here's what happened. I understand the weather. We've dealt with an awful lot in this session. This was a more complicated bill than I assumed when I was asked, can we have a hearing on this day? If this day for all these groups would be 2 weeks from now, that's when we'd have the hearing. So I think as we move along, that if more people have opposition, I'm hoping that they will be. This is not the beginning. This is one side. We still have a Senate side if that happens. And so I guess and I apologize for raising my voice, but I want to make perfectly clear. There is no ram through. This is no one side. The chairman does not have a position in this. It was simply a matter of that's the way it fell. Okay? And so, and maybe you were going down the wrong, but I don't want to get into this that there was somehow malicious intent on anybody's side. There wasn't.
May I address?
Yes.
So my point is that these folks were already prepared, regardless because the bill was already out there. The general public did not know about the bill. Mm-hmm. Many of these other conferees had said that they already had knowledge. That's my point. Not about maliciousness, not about intent, not about hidden accusations or anything like that. Mm. But how the public is left out of this.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yes,
Any other questions?
Thank you.
I think she was tired of hearing me talk. I know. Well, and I understand how the thing operates, and it was unfortunate, a matter of timing, that when this came to light's a bad word. When this was finally able to be read in and to have a bill that, in a perfect world, we could have had a hearing and nobody would have been here. So, I mean, you know, this is not a perfect science, and you know, in some things we have been known to do bills on the floor without any sort of a hearing. We have been known to push things in other committees very quickly, and again, there was no anything, and I don't believe that anybody's is an opponent to this would not have their voice be heard at some time. And so, you know, the process is a bill gets introduced, it gets assigned to a committee chair decides what happens, and then if it passes out of committee, it goes to the floor, gets voted on by the committee of the whole, then it would go on to the other side. And the process starts all over again. Just because you have a thought on a piece of paper does not make it law. I know some people think that. Many Kansans also think that as a state legislator, you get paid what your federal delegates get paid. So we don't have staff year-round. We do many things on our own, and mistakes get made. We had a challenge the first few days of the session. We could not communicate with my new assistant via anything to get a calendar, to get anything done. And so I wish it was a perfect world, but we do the best we can with what we have. Are there anyone else here that is an opponent wishing to testify? Marcy, I apologize.
It's okay. I thought I received a acknowledgement that I was speaking, so it's okay.
I apologize.
You're
Marcy
right.
laughing. Go ahead.
Lafine. It looks like laughing, but thank you, Chairman Rogers and the committee for hearing me today. I too have driven over from Butler County, came a long way. Hopefully we're not going to have ice on the way back. I rise in opposition, and I rise as someone who grew up on a farm in Nebraska. As my testimony said, I was a farm kid, and I was visiting with someone in back. Conservation is just something you do as a landowner. I forget if I was 5th, 6th generation of our farm, and it has to be conserved, to be passed on. Waterways, we knew our land. I walked so many bean fields, I could tell you every row and where the badger holes are, and walked all of our creeks for the thistle. We know where the fox dens are. We know where the coyotes are. We know where the deer paths are. That's property owners know. We got some property in Chautauqua right now. I know the time of the year the eagles come back. I know where to be looking out for the rattlesnakes and the copperheads. As I sit here and listen, honestly, it breaks my heart, you guys, that we're at this place in our country that somehow we've lost sight that private ownership is where we want land to be. Government doesn't know better than the private individual how to do it. It never gets done as efficiently either. Why do we think government is the solution? It's not. It gets taken out of my back pocket. I don't get a say about how much gets taken out, except through my representation. Then it gets filtered to DC or Topeka or my county or my school district or my city. And then it comes back to me. And then they have the audacity to buy a silver platter with it and put on it some strings, maybe even a noose, and tell me it's a great deal. You get it back, probably 40% less, but we're going to help you how to manage it. We're going to tell you how to manage it. We know better. We're the educated ones. But no one has walked and done that field like a farmer and a rancher has. They know the yields. There's so many bright. You guys, do you all know that a combine can tell exactly where in the field it's lacking nutrients and the yields by acre, by foot? It's satellite controlled. And so that's why I rise in opposition. I'm tired of the tone that somehow government knows better than private individuals, and that we should be all clamoring to get that federal money back. The federal money is our money. It was taken from us to begin with. It came from each one of us, and that's supposed to come back to us and somehow do miraculously great things versus how we could have done it ourselves. Please remember why you're sitting in those seats. Your first primary role is to defend my liberties and my pocketbook. And please do not think that you have a bigger solution than what we could do privately. I said in the budget committee last week, guys, there's lanes for government, there's lanes for community, for neighbor, for churches, and there's just some things that are not government's lane. We've got to get back to that. Be people who care about our neighbor, and we go help them out. I grew up with that. A neighbor died, and everybody's been there. If you're from a rural community, you've seen it. Everybody shows up in force and harvests together, right? That's what we do. So I guess as I come here as one of the very few little constituents that came, I hope my voice represents many, many. And for those of you I know who are landowners on this committee, I hope I strike a chord with you. And I'm honestly, the one last word I want to say, this covetous tone and the language of collectivism, we are a democratic republic. We are not a socialist nation, and we are not about collectivism, and we are not about coveting other people's land. Thank you for hearing my testimony. I stand in opposition.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you. And I do apologize. I didn't mean to skip over you. Anyone else wishing to testify as an opponent? Written only opponents include Dan Byfield from American Stewards of Liberty, Shad Sullivan from RCAF USA, Shanix, oh boy. She's a senator or a candidate? Anyway, Shani, okay. Omani E, Kansas Senate District Number 10, Sheila Sumter from Olathe, Tracy Barton from the Kansas Natural Resource Coalition, Coalition 31 Kansas counties. So, anyone else? Anyone want to tackle that question we had? How about if you have an answer, we'll pass that on to Representative. You go ahead, and then somebody remember it so we can tell Representative Shue had to step out. So.
Us country folk shop at Bass Pro as well. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Yes, Representative Minix.
Yeah, this is kind of directed at Representative Shue. If he goes to Bass Pro and buys some sporting goods stuff, I've got some nice land in western Kansas that he can sure come hunt pheasants. It's a lot better this year than last year. We've got a little more moisture and a lot more animals out there. I think there was a little bit of mention earlier about walk-in hunting. My understanding about 10 years ago, if a landowner wanted to voluntarily give their land for open public hunting, they got paid $2 an acre, and I don't know if that rate's changed. Secretary? Okay, and Wildlife and Parks would provide some signs to place on that, and then if you're out in our area pheasant hunting, you don't have to ask for permission from that particular property owner. But that was a voluntary deal for some landowners if they wish to do that, as I remember on that walk-in hunting program. Okay. Thank you.
Very good. All right, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2541. Tomorrow we will meet at 3:30 talking water. Correct? That's tomorrow, right? All right. We are adjourned.